And we are here today at the Ask the MMTIC Expert phone call with our wonderful expert, co-author of the MMTIC assessment, Dr. Elizabeth Murphy. And we have so far 6 people with us right now. Elizabeth, you still there?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Man, we're gonna be victorious with this technology. I can feel it.
Okay. You can also be patient with it, I guess.
Oh man, that's a big challenge. Okay, well everyone, welcome to our call today. I'm Rob Rothschild. I'm the Marketing Director at CAPT, the Center for Applications of Psychological Type, and we are the publishers of the Murphy-Meiskeier Type Indicator for Children, where every child is appreciated, every child engaged. That's our motto that we try to go by. And today is an open conversation with Dr. Elizabeth Murphy, who is here. And I'm just going to let Elizabeth start out with the topic that she chose to get things going, which is, what sort of questions you might get from parents and kids about results from the MMTIC. But that's just to start off. Please feel free to jump in and ask any questions you like after Elizabeth gets going. So Elizabeth, take it away.
So good morning, everyone. I love working with families and with kids, and it's so nice because they are discovering who they are within the family system and how to work with those differences within the family system. But sometimes there are specific questions that people get asked, and people have said, I'm not exactly sure how I would phrase my answer to them. So if you have a specific question that a parent has thrown at you, we can begin there. And then after that, I'd really like to talk a little bit about discipline and the different types and how they react to different discipline methods. So does anyone have a question, or has anyone used the MTIC with families that they could give some feedback to the group?
Well, Elizabeth, since I have everyone's mic muted right now, we'd have to pick someone to start. So,
okay.
Anyone want to raise their hand or have a question? Sandra says something here. Let's try Sandra.
Okay, hi, Sandra.
Oh, hi. Hi, how are you? So nice to hear your voice, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
I was speaking with one of my kids about his sister. He's an extrovert. I'm guessing she might be an introvert. He's very upset with her because she always depends on him. They just moved from London back to New York, and the sister is withdrawing into her room because the transition is tough for her, and he wants her to at least try to talk to people, at their party this past weekend. Mm-hmm. And so, well, unfortunately, she kind of destroyed something in his room. And I thought maybe this might be a good way for us to launch a discussion of how the introverted and the extroverted siblings might have some friction about their expectations of each other.
Right. How old are they?
The boy is 15, and the girl, she's in 7th grade. I think she's either 12 or 13.
Okay. So you not only have E&I happening, you have age happening, because it would be very different if they were 6 and 8 than
exactly.
13 and 15. The 13-year is typically feeling so uncomfortable with everything about themselves that that high need for being able to predict their environment, that introverted high need at this age for being able to predict the environment and predict if she is an F, the response that she's going to get from that environment. So an IT, an introverted thinker, is going to react differently than an introverted feeler. Do you have any sense of what her judgment function is?
I've done the MTIC with him, but not with her.
Okay. Okay. So what about his judgment function? Do you know what it is? Like, is it T or F?
I'm so sorry, I didn't hear that.
Is his judgment function T or F? Do you know?
I think he's an F. I would have to get out his file.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a sensitive kid for sure. They both are in different ways.
Exactly. And ENTs are very sensitive about others and empathetic with others, but just they express it in a different way. But an
Exactly.
extroverted feeler coming into a new environment is going to find high energy from getting to know as many new people as they can. How can somebody invite me over if they don't know me? Therefore, my best way to get reconnected into this environment is to get to know a lot of new people. But for the introvert, going into that same environment, it's like diving headlong into a tidal wave. And
Yeah.
if they are an introverted feeler, it's like every encounter is a potential for rejection, whereas
Oh.
the extroverted feeler looks every encounter is a potential for an association, a new relationship. So for the one, they're going to get high energy from it and joy in the experience. For the other one, it really is a trepidation issue. So when you keep saying things like, you need to get out, you need to go, you need to talk, all you really do is reconfirm for them that you're probably going to screw it up, you're probably going to mess it up, which then just sends them back to their room. It may be more helpful in this kind of a situation as saying, I want you to pick one person in the room. Pick them by what they're wearing. Like, tell me your favorite color, blue. And if somebody in there has blue on, then I want you to go up and just talk with them. And that's all you have to do is just talk with one person. And you might even do it by offering them something, like going up and saying, if it's a party, can I get you a Coke? Can I get you a snack tray? Is there anything I can do to help you? Because if that person is an introverted feeler, having a job to do, like handing out the cookies, is so much easier, because then they can say hello, perhaps make a connection, but not be pressured to make a connection because they have a job that requires them to go do something else. So,
Well, you know,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm I'm an extroverted feeler, but I need a job because I'm super shy in a strange, not even strange, but a new environment. And I have told people again and again, give me a job, I'll do anything, but I need a segue. And I love that idea about the shirt and the color. I had never thought about even that kind of anchor for a kid.
You're giving them a singular direction, and yet you're allowing them to switch. So it's not just go do. You've helped them get a start. But I also like your comment. People oftentimes assume that a social shyness goes with introversion, when it's really the function that is introverted. So if that judgment function is introverted, the hesitancy is going to be coming about, am I forming a relationship? Am I initiating a relationship I won't really want to have in the long run because I don't know them well enough? And how am I going to gather more information about them? But a socially shy person, who could also be an extrovert, would get their energy from interacting and doing, but that social shyness would still have them hesitate in the newness of a moment. So
Yep.
the new social situation, but their frustration seems to be resolved quickly as long as that environment, that new environment, is a comfortable one. Whereas the introvert by type is going to be processing internally, and so they're not necessarily uncomfortable in the room as much as they're still gathering data or making judgments internally, and on the outside it might look like they haven't acclimated, but internally they're processing and may be fine. That's the disconnect that we have between one model of extroversion and introversion, which is trait-based, and then the introversion and extroversion from type, which is processing and energy-based. But a good example. The other piece that's really important about what you said about them and with their age is that children and young adults, young teens, like the 15 and 13 or 12-year-old might be, are still looking so much for affirmation. Remember, their job at this point in their life is to interact with the world to see what is me and what is not me. So they can't sort sometimes what is me from what is not me from what is weird. So a lot of times, if it's not me, it must be weird, versus if it's not me, it could just be a difference. So your two children there are saying, the one is saying, be like me, it'll help you go out and do things. Because what they're offering is out of a generous, caring heart. They're offering their sibling the one tool they know that will work. The difference is it will work well for them, but may not work well for the introvert.
Mm-hmm. So helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Cool. Anyone else have a comment or a question?
Yes, who would like to ask a question? I think Julia has raised her hand, so let's see if we can enable Julia. Are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Hi, Dr. Murphy. It's so great to hear your voice as well. I was excited to hear your voice. Okay, I have a quick question. I am encountering parents who have difficulties with thinking children who like to debate or argue, and they're not quite sure how to handle the situation. And for instance, the child might argue that the sky is not blue, when obviously the sky is blue. So no matter what the situation is, there's a constant argument, and the child will want to always have the last say. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, there are some things we can do. Well, how old are we talking about here?
Just turned 14.
Okay. Oh, well, that's also an important piece.
Yes.
Because it's almost sometimes. Yesterday I was in the store in PetSmart getting some supplies for my dog, and there was a mom, and it looked like a child about 14 in front of me, and he's telling her, if you use a staple gun, you'll be able to use a staple gun and hook that onto your wood. And the mom looks at him and says, really? Do you see how thick the wood is? There's no way a staple gun's going to go through there. Think. He goes, no, you can do it this way. And he keeps trying to defend his position. And she's like, it won't work. It won't work. And he's like, no, it really needs to. You're not listening to me. And she goes, and you're not listening to me. And so all of a sudden, they weren't solving the problem of how to hang up whatever they wanted to hang up. They were fighting. Mm-hmm. And so it ended up with him walking away from the basket and her just going through the checkout line. And I felt so badly because there was a piece of me that so wanted to intervene and say, go back to topic. The problem you started with is, how can we fix this? And you got off onto some of those accusations of, you can't think that way. Now, if you have a child who just loves to argue for the sake of arguing, and if they're a T, it isn't arguing, it's the challenge of using language in a way to convince you to see the world through my lens. Mm. And it's almost a game sometimes, if it's a playful interlude, if it's not a critical issue, when they're just doing it. And okay. So they may become very precise. Like if you say the sky is blue, they would say, it isn't actually blue. Blue would be darker. That's not a blue. That's got a gray in it. And that gray in it changes the color, so you really can't say blue. And you just want to scream and say, it's close enough to blue.
Exactly.
But that isn't the point. The point is, when you have that and you feel the inside guts inside of you starting to do like the mother did in line yesterday and start reacting with, wait a minute, what are you saying? You're not listening. Then you automatically need to say, okay, I got to take a deep breath and take a distance away from the conversation and say, what is the game? Mm-hmm. So if they did that with the blue piece with me, I might say, interesting. You were so with multiple variations of color in the sky that it influenced your selection of words, whereas I looked at it more generically, and blue was satisfying for me. But you seem to have a need for a more precise word. But that's okay. I can be generic and get the gist of it, and you can be specific and get the precision of it. We're just looking at it through two different viewfinders. So instead of making it a debatable issue, you allow the difference to exist. Now, if you have a child who just truly wants to debate, they're just feeling the need, I go back to debate rules. And debate rules, I think, are something like, and it's been a long time, so you'd probably have to look them up or make them up, and say family debate rules will be this. You get to make 3 position statements, and then you must stop and listen. And then before you can make any new position statements, you have to restate what you think I said. So it isn't just speaking, but having to listen. Or you can say, you've got 2 minutes to convince me. And T's use the word convince more than persuade. F's use the word persuade. But persuade to a T can sound like begging, not persuading. So if I think I'm talking to a T, I'm going to use prove it to me, convince, make your point. And you can do it by time. So you can do it, you have 2 minutes. And you would be amazed how many words can be spoken in 2 minutes. An awful lot.
Yes.
But then it would be now, by debate rules, I get 2 minutes to make my position, and then you get 2 minutes for rebuttal, I get 2 minutes for rebuttal, and then when positions are on the table, then we can say, is there an issue that needs to be solved? So if we're putting positions on the table for, can I go to the concert in the park Friday night, that's very different than global warming issues, which we may just be debating for the sake of debating a topic versus debating because I'm trying to get you to see my position so that I can get permission to do something or I can win an objective. Do you get the difference?
Yes, absolutely. Those are great suggestions.
So I'll tell you one more I did, and this was with my grandchildren, but they got into, it was a child, but he was younger, he's about 8, and he got into this correction. Anything that I might have said, he made a correction on it. And so they happen to be, I call it grandma camp. They come and spend 4 or 5 days with me, and it's just grandma camp. So I said, if I have that much wrong with me, then I'm not going to be a very good babysitter. So here's the deal. If you correct me and we get to number 100, I'll take you home because it won't be safe to leave you with somebody this So I think we got to 16, and then we didn't have it anymore for the rest of the week.
That was great.
So it's kind of like there was a response cost. You want to correct, feel free to correct, but there will be a response cost.
Yes.
And all of a sudden there wasn't this need. But I think it was also balanced with, we had some enjoyable time together, so the relationship wasn't having to be tested anymore. Mm-hmm. It was just comfortable. So if I had to give people a first step, it would be, no matter what horrible thing they're doing, thinking, or saying in the moment, make sure the relationship is solid. Because if it's solid, you're going to be able to do more with the child than if it's not. Mm-hmm. That's why I feel really badly about that mom and her son in front of me. It's like they just started out having an innocent little conversation about stapling, and they walked away from each other without it being resolved. And It didn't have to be a relationship issue, but it did.
Yes. Yes, and I've also noticed a lot of times with the T's, if you just even help them go through the process of figuring it out, walking through the situation. For instance, we were at the vet yesterday with my son, and he was interested in pet insurance. So he started looking online at pet insurance and figured out the cost of purchasing it and the cost of taking your pet to the vet, and he came to the conclusion that it's not worth the cost. At first it started out as a little bit of a debate, do we get it or do we not? But eventually he came to the conclusion himself. And I think if a lot of parents would allow their children just to go down the path a little bit, then they could come to the conclusion themselves that...
See, I love what that did because it turned it into the Z model. Mm-hmm. It's like, should we buy pet insurance?
Right.
And you go, sensing, what data do we have? Mm-hmm. So we went online and found more data. Then T, is it cost effective? 3, if we didn't have it, will we still be able to take care of our pet if they do get hurt or injured, which would be the F. in the end, are there other more reasonable ways to get the money that we might need to save for pet emergencies? So as long as they go through that SNTF way of looking at the issue, you're always going to be able to get it as long as there's a question that's looking for a solution. That's the difference. But there will be some times when you have young children, they're really honing their analysis, the skills for analysis, and they will question and challenge just for the joy of questioning and challenging, but they're not challenging you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know, versus solving the problem the way your son did. Nice.
Yes. Great. Thank you so much. That was a big help.
Thanks.
Elizabeth, when I hear you talk about those things, I always think, it's not just kids who could use that sort of help. I think we all can use the ability to keep our relationship strong and focus on the problem, not the feeling that you get when you're fighting with someone or let's say debating with someone.
It is interesting how many ideas that work with children do also work with adults.
Yes, indeed. Well, Julia, thanks so much. Those are great questions.
Thank you.
And now the floor is open for another question, if anyone would like to. I think Jeff has raised his hand, so let's see if we can get Jeff. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, hello, Dr. Murphy.
Good morning.
I just wanted to ask, I work in a school. I'm a school counselor, and I've had a little bit of trouble. I guess some of it may be my own lack of doing my own homework on the MTIC, but when the MTIC produces one result and I go through the type verification activity with a child and that produces something totally different, and maybe 2 letters are different, or even 3 sometimes, I really have trouble with what to do with that and how to explain that to a child or even parents. I feel like I'm just not ready to explain that to them, or I can't reconcile the 2 for them. And I was wondering if you had any tips for that.
No, that's a great question. I haven't had it happen often at all for 3, but a lot of times when you're running into an issue like that, you're running into a persona image versus a self-image. So they may have an image of what they think is a good child or what you're supposed to do. And so they're going to want to do that, especially, I don't know what your age is. What age do you have? Because the elementary are going to be really more likely to run into this.
Yeah, mostly middle school, but I have had a couple of elementary kids too in the same family, that I've given it to.
So what I tell them is, how interesting, on the day you answered the questions, your energy and your interest were being drawn toward, and I'm making this up, sensing and thinking. But today when you listen to the descriptions, your interest seems to be attracted to the intuition and feeling. The good news is, inside of you, there is a sensing side, an intuitive side, a thinking side, and a feeling side. And that you may still be struggling with which one is my leading side and which is my backup team. You can use all of them. So choosing one does not mean you don't have access to the other. So if you have a caring and giving heart, does not mean you cannot think reasonably and logically, and vice versa. If you look at things for its objective truthfulness, is it real, is it right, is it accurate, does not mean you don't express caring. People just do it in different ways. So the goal of this instrument and the goal of this information is to help you, 1, know all of those component pieces that you have within you that you're going to be able to use as you age and develop. And 2, to help you sort and say, what's my leading side and what's my backup team? And so far it didn't sort for you as well. But perhaps if we do a few activities, it'll help you a little bit more. But guess what? You have your whole lifetime to figure this out. So there's no real rush. But let's just talk about it, a situation. And sometimes... Are you there still, Jeff? Did we lose Jeff?
Yes, I'm here. I just muted myself since my phone started ringing.
Sorry. But so sometimes when I start talking with them about an event in their family life or in their school life, and how would they approach solving that problem, then they immediately go in one direction and the other. But it takes us back to that Z again, that if you go, oh, so your first thought would be, wait a minute, that's not right, that's not fair. And then your second thought was, how can I fix this? How can I make this better for everyone? Then you've used both your thinking side and your feeling side. If you say, oh, wait a minute, I know a great idea, we could do this, but, well, wait a minute, do we have everything we need? You've used your intuition side when you're looking at new possibilities, but when you say, do we have everything that we need, you're going back to your sensing side, looking for that specific information and that supporting pieces to make the idea work. So it's kind of like, where does your mind go first? Not only. Most times when kids have struggled with selecting a preference, it's because of this innate fear of, if I pick this one, then that means I don't have any of the other.
Right. So you really have to delve deeper to find out more.
Or you have to just open the door for them to still leave it undecided.
Right.
Say, it's okay. And if you want to come back in a week, we can look at the information again and say, Now, if a child leaves totally confused and uncomfortable, like, I wish I understood, I wish I knew me, I don't know who I am, then I would say, oh, then let's focus. Let's pick one pair. And I'd either focus on E and I, or I'd focus on J and P, because those are the most observable. And say, let's look at, for the next 2 weeks, I want you to think, is planning and following through with that plan the best way for you to be comfortable, or is being able to think on your feet and be adaptable and spontaneous the best way for you to be comfortable when something comes up? And that they will get to know themselves a little bit by paying attention to their inner core reactions, which they may not be listening to right now. The younger the child, and in middle school they're still young, the more they're influenced by the social expectation, because that's the age that they learn the social expectation. So, for example, with the social expectation piece, I watched a child a couple of weeks ago, and I had interviewed them very recently. And when I interviewed them, I said, so what is it about winning or losing? And this was a child with a T preference. And I think he might have been 10, something like that, 9 or 10. And he gave me the perfect social answer. Well, it's just a game. You go out, you play your best, you're part of a team, and whatever happens, happens, because it is just a game. And then I watched him on the field, and he had a complete emotional meltdown because the other teammates were playing stupid. He was like, no, you're supposed to be here, you're supposed to be there. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And he's having a total meltdown. So knowing in your head the social response is that age. That's what they're learning. Being able to execute and use that social response is tied to the development level of their functions. So it's a step in the process. He's absolutely where he should be. But now we have to say is, when knowing wasn't enough, how can you cope with it? How can you make it better? And for that child, we just help them sort the difference between leisure play and competitive play. And when you're on a leisure team, people play. When you're on a competitive team, people play with skills. And then you can challenge when a person doesn't use their skills accurately. But on a leisure team, it's for the joy of the activity, not the skill. And being able to categorize it that way made it more reasonable for this child to be able to say, okay, this is my leisure team, we just play. and this is the competitive team, and I can say to them, hey, you're not in position, go over. I told them, make sure the coach wants your help there.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay. And most people call me Murph or Elizabeth, so I'm pretty informal if everyone's comfortable with that.
Yeah, that was a great question, Jeff. I'm glad you asked that because that's a common one that we get. That dealing with the the different verification process and giving kids permission to not have to make a decision right away. That's an important one. So who else would like to ask a question? You can raise your hand in the interface there, type in a question. This is your chance to talk to Murph. I have a hard time calling you that, Elizabeth. I'm sorry. It's just hard.
You call Elizabeth too. I will say that...
I see Julia's got her hand up again. Go ahead, Elizabeth. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that CAPT has just completed some additional research with the MTIC, and it continues to show excellent reliability for the different ages and scaled separation so that your EI questions are only for EI and the SN questions are only for SN, etc. So there is a constant monitoring of the worthiness of the tool to make sure that it really is something that's going to be helpful to kids.
Yes, that's right. We're constantly trying new ways to do that. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Julia, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, I have another question. It's a two-part question. I work with a lot of children and parents are involved with this. So my question is, when working with children at all ages, work with second grade through high school, do you suggest, especially when it's with the younger children I have questions with, the parent being in the room during the verification process, or do you suggest only being with the child by themselves? And then the second part of that question is debriefing with the parent afterwards. Do you do a separate meeting with the parent after the meeting with the child? And if so, do you do it immediately after, or would you set up a week later? How do you typically handle that situation?
No, those are great questions too. If the parent is in the room, and I've had it more when it's been a phone feedback, and the parent needs to hear about differences, but the parent is not allowed to be a functional member of the conversation. So they're a fly on the wall, not allowed to say a word or make a sound. So that if the child says, oh no, I really do think I'm much more of an intuitive, the parent is not allowed to go, oh, and make some kind of secondary sound that would send the message to the child, you picked the wrong one. So, so I don't have a problem with them being there. I do have a problem with them participating in the verification process. But there's an asset for having them there because they get to hear about the normalcy of both perspectives. They get to hear that your child has both perspectives but favors one. And the good type development is helping them to recognize when do I need to use my sensing side and when do I need to use my intuitive side. So I allow them to be there but not to participate. In the briefing with the parent, if the parent is there and they want to then hear, because they've been part of that briefing, they really don't have to have a separate part. But let's say you did feedback with the child and now you're going to do feedback with the parent. I would have the child with me giving that briefing feedback to the parent so the child hears everything you're telling the parent. There's no mystery there. So you can say, well, you know, when Bobby and I were talking, some of the things that he discovered about himself. Well, Bobby, when you were looking at the E&I differences, what did you determine was important about one of those for you? And let the child then share with the parent what they think is true and important. If the child says something inaccurate, then you can say, okay, well, I appreciate that explanation. I want to fine-tune it a little bit for your mom so they really understand, or your dad so they really understand. If the parent has other questions, such as, so how am I supposed to help him get his homework done when this is his preference? Then sometimes, because that's not debriefing, you're now getting into something more involved. If it's a single question, I would turn to the child and say, is this something you feel like we can help your mom with right now or your dad with right now? Because in the little booklet for the elementary age, Exploring Your Type, there's a page where it says for the child, when I'm stuck with learning, here's how I want you to help me. When I'm stuck with homework, here's how I want you to help me. When I'm being disciplined and I'm in trouble for something I did, here's how I want you to redirect me. So we can go to that page and we can actually get the child's thought first about what would they want. So for instance, a lot of intuitive kids, when they're doing homework, do not want to know how to solve the problem from the beginning. They only want you to tell them what the next step is. They don't want to know everything. But many teachers and many parents will say, how can you possibly get to the step C if you don't know what A and B is? I need to know whether you know A and B also. All you do is make the child sit there and basically not listen to you until you get to C, where they want to be. So, you know, if it's a single issue like that, or, you know, one or two ideas and the child's input is valuable, then I would do that. But if the parent starts into, I really have a hard time making him listen to me, it seems like we're always in a fuss with each other, then I would say, well, you know what? This is a good tool for helping to deal with that. But I would think that maybe that would be better if you and I schedule a time when we could talk about it as how can we address this through parenting. So that instead of looking at how can I fix the child would then hear, how can mom get and dad get parenting insight? And so then it would become a separate session. Okay. You don't want it to deviate. This is a feedback session. So it should be, the child should leave this session feeling wonderful about either who they are or who they might be, because all of it's going to be good. So you really don't want to spend a whole lot of time with corrective interventions.
Yeah, excellent. Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
I like that one. Thank you. That's a great question again, Julia. So who is next? So it looks like Esther is next. Let's see if we can get her going. Hello, Esther. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you. Yeah? Oh, good. That's cool. Okay, hi. This has been fantastic, hearing all these queries and suggestions of how to deal with things. It's been brilliant. Thank you very much for everybody's input there. My experience with the MMTIC is that I work with children from about the age of 8 to 12 and their teachers. And the most referrals I get from the teachers are to do with, I suppose, what the teachers call behaviour, but in actual fact, a lot of the time I see it's to do with the EI and JP preferences. And the JP preferences I'm okay about, with giving the teacher strategies to help, but with the E and I preferences, that's a little bit more difficult. And I just wondered if Dr. Murphy had any suggestions or strategies for helping the teachers work, I suppose, more positively for pupils who are sort of more extreme EI, with an E or an I preference. Does that make sense?
It does. I think so. So if you have a child whose energy is coming from extroversion, they're going to have to be actively involved in their world in some way. So I would be looking at the teacher and saying, knowing that's a need for at least half of your class, what is your pacing? And if they're with 8-year-olds, it might be every 15 minutes there's a change in activity. If they're with 12-year-olds, it might be every 30 to 45 minutes. Or they might say that one of the things we know is that there's only so much information that can be taken in short-term memory, and then it has to be filed. But Extroverts file by dialoguing about it. Introverts file by reflecting about it. So the teacher could say, talk for 10 minutes about the blood system and how all the cells form and all the pieces that are happening. And then say, okay, file time. If you file best by clarifying all of the information with a friend, interact with a friend. If you file best by pulling back and just thinking about it for a moment and making sure it's in a good file folder somewhere in your brain, feel free to do that. Everybody's got 3 minutes. Go. So that you actually are acknowledging the value of both perspectives, and you have built into your curriculum a way to honor that without changing any of the lesson plan. Now let's say you have a child who's always talking, always calling out. The tendency is to call that extroversion when it may just be inappropriate behavior. And it may be inappropriate behavior stemming from a self-esteem issue, it may be from an emotional issue, it may be from a behavior just never put in check. So what you can say with that child is, depending on the ages, you have such a wealth of questions that if we answered all of your questions, we would probably not be able to get through the lesson or listen to the questions of others. So here's what I'm going to do. You get 2 questions every half hour. And every other question you have, I want you to use this note card and write it down. Don't write the whole question, just write down blood goes into where, whatever it is. And you and I will have a private session and answer every one of those questions after class. So if the question is that important, if the content of the question is that important, the child's going to be able to get the individual time with the teacher, which is what they may have been looking for anyway. And then, but the class won't have lost all of the focus, only going in the direction of the one person's mind. Their questions may be excellent, but if they're the only ones who gets to ask them, it can deprive the others from taking it into a new track if their thoughts were going a different way. And what I see is sometimes teachers will listen to the same child ask 4 or 5 questions and then go, all right, we've got to go on now, no more questions. And then it's because they feel a need to finish the content that they had to introduce, but they've shut off questioning because it was usurped by one person and they don't feel like they have any more time for it.
Right.
If they're just talking and it's not content talking, then what you want to do is you want to make sure that you get them to talk about content. So you would say, turn to your partner and tell them how to, make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, whatever the content is. When I call on you, don't tell me your thought, tell me what your partner said. Because so many times when they're sharing their own thought, it's 30 sentences. When they're sharing somebody else's thought, it's 2. Okay, so you can still give them that chance to interact with a peer, but you limit the feedback.
That sounds perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Good ideas. Thank you very much.
I like that. Talk about your peer instead of yourself. That's another good one. So let's see who's next in our queue for people who might want to ask a question. Oh, by the way, Jeff asked Elizabeth what your type is, if you'd be willing to share it.
Oh, absolutely. My preferences are INFP.
Me too.
I had a ESTP son. I still do. Of course, he's not a child anymore. He's a man. And I have an INFJ daughter. So I said, and I was married to an ISTJ. So I felt between all of their preferences, they gave me the best self-study program I could have ever had for being able to see differences in action.
Well, and Jeff says he's also an INFP, so we're dominating so far here today.
Okay.
So we still have lots of people here. Go ahead and raise your hand or type your question in. Who would like to ask Elizabeth something next? Don't be bashful. This is a good shot for you to ask a question that I'm sure is on the tip of everyone else's tongue too. So far no one's doing that, so Elizabeth, you want to amplify anything that you've talked about already or introduce something new?
Well, I do. When I'm looking at working with families and I want them to understand their child's differences, I will usually start out by just giving them about differences. Here's one type of child, here's another type of child. And remember, it's where they get their energy. They are not compelled to behave that way. But the younger they are, the harder it's going to be to control it and manage it. So when they're very young, and that could mean all the way through high school, you may need a rule to follow rather than letting them use inner judgment. Because when there's a rule, you're in at 11, period. That's not an inner judgment. You don't have to make any decision. You just have to comply. So when you don't want your child having options, you make a rule. When you want your child to have options, you teach them how to process that information through that Z model, the sensing, the intuition, the thinking, and the feeling. Because the more you use a function, the more it develops. So we want parents to be able to say, let's ask our 4 kinds of questions. So when I work with a parent, I usually, and they know their type and they know their child's type, I will start with, what are your child's strengths? And then, what are your child's stretches? Where do they have to really stretch? And then I will work with them on what are some potential parenting challenges that you're going to run into when you have a child with this 4-letter type code. Then we'll be looking at distinguishing the difference between what is type and what is misbehavior, and we've talked about that before. Then we'll talk about suggested discipline strategies specific for that type, and then recommendations for helping the child with learning and recommendations for helping that child form relationships. So that if I'm doing that follow-up kind of meeting with a parent, and it's not about let's solve an issue I'm having with my child, but I just want to get to know my child better, that's the kind of information I address with them. When we have the luxury of knowing the parent's type as well as the child's type, then we actually can get into some interaction. Because there were times growing up when I would say, I totally understood my introverted child, but my extroverted child was driving me crazy and draining my energy. Or I totally understood my intuitive child, but my sensing child was asking so many questions, it'd be like, what? What? My sensing husband would go, no, he's fine, he's fine, he's asking all the right things. It's like, oh, okay, but where is she getting those wild ideas? It's like, okay. So what was easy as a parent was to see affirmed in their child a type that resonated with home base for them. What was harder to appreciate is that different child's type when it was trying to find expression. And if you are the only person in the house with that particular preference, like we only had one extrovert in our home, no matter how many times I might vocally encourage, feel free to talk about it, what we modeled was internal reflection. So we never modeled a good way of approaching things in an extroverted fashion. He had to get that through outside channels in other ways. So if you are working with families, you might find that it's helpful for you if you have a kind of outline pattern of what you believe is important to address in a typical feedback session, and then what do you feel is a way you're going to help a parent who's dealing with more of a specific issue, such as my PetSmart story with, they definitely had a communication issue. May not be a serious one. It was tough on them last night, but you know, it may be something that was just very temporary. But when you have adolescents, and he looked like he was, you know, the 13, 14 age range, and you have that happen 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, it can become very threatening to the bond that is uniting you, and you don't want that to happen. So that's issue-related work with the family versus information-related work with the family.
Hey, Elizabeth, I've got Esther with a follow-up question here. Esther, can you ask your question?
Hi, yes. Actually, my question's about the MTIC materials. I'm just wondering if there's somewhere in the UK that I can order them, or if I have to go through CAPT in the USA.
You'll find some of them on Amazon.
Oh, okay.
That I'm talking about the books, but if you're looking specifically for, you know, a few of the unique and less popular items, you'll probably have to get them from CAPT. But if you want to, you can email me. My email is rob@capt.org, and ask me any specific question, and I can let you know if they're only direct from CAPT or if they're available on Amazon.
Great. Okay, thank you.
And Rob, are some of the things available at Amazon through PDF format?
Not PDF, no. No, we only have hard copy materials. Like if you see on your screen there, there's the 3 Exploring Personality Type workbooks. Those are available through Amazon, and those are probably the most in-demand supplemental material. We recommend that every student get one of those to go along with their administration of the MMTIC, and those you can get on Amazon.
Great. Super,
those are real helpful. The chemistry of personality for the teachers, it hasn't become very popular yet, but I wrote it, but I really use it because it talks about the teacher's style of teaching. Then it talks about the child's styles. Then it talks about interventions for each one of the dichotomies, and then about each one of the letters, so that you can start with know who you are as an educator and what is important to you as an educator. So as an INFP, it's like I want to encourage individual development. I want you to find out who you are and become the best you are and take off and soar into new channels of thought not ever conceived. Whereas maybe the ESTJ is looking for somebody who is going to be able to be precise in their learning and able to use it to analyze and find the flaws in our political systems, in our economic systems, so that they can create interventions that are going to be realistic and able to be applied right now. So because of our different underlying values, we may focus our style of instruction very differently. So I find that one, and I thought The Developing Child was on Amazon. Maybe I didn't use the right word, not PDF. What is it when it's like an electronic book? An electronic copy.
Sorry, I was muted there. Yes, as a Kindle book, you can get The Developing Child. Yes. Yes. Okay. And there's the, you should see it on your screen right now, The Chemistry of Personality. I think that's available on Amazon too.
I actually have that book.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe you can give some more honest feedback to others about whether it had value for you or not. But
yeah, absolutely. It was brilliant. But I'm really keen to soak up as much as possible around education in schools, because obviously that's where I'm working, and where I'm working with all of this rather than with families. But definitely teachers' own style is big in the whole thing.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And while we're on the subject of teachers' guides, this one on your screen right now, when it catches up, Verifying Type with Students is another good guide for teachers.
Thank you.
So we're just a couple of minutes.
I'm just really excited that y'all are here and that there's interest in working with families and children and with the schools and children. Because I still believe that if we graduate children with skills for knowing who they are, we've put them into a business opportunity where they're going to be able to present themselves well at their interviews, where they're going to be able to go in and work with teams better. It's so funny, I read a business article recently, and it was trying to find the common element between a lot of successful business leaders. And it named, you know, it's like, was it empathy? And it's like, no, you really couldn't say Steve Jobs had empathy. And then it went through a whole bunch of them. But what it settled on was that one of the key elements between these major business figures, you can see my intuitive interpretation rather than that precise sensing, was that they knew themselves. They knew what they thought. And I thought, wow, that's where type can become a powerful piece in that exploration of who we are. Type is only a piece of us. It's not everything. But it really is a critical filter. And the more those functions are developed, the more the child is going to be able to filter through sensing information and intuitive information and do it in a thinking and a feeling way.
Hey,
so I'm
Elizabeth,
very grateful that you gave up an hour of summertime.
Hey, Elizabeth, if you wouldn't mind, there's one more question. Do we have time? Just maybe a quick one?
Sure, sure.
Cassie, can you hear me? Cassie Murray. Okay. Well, I'll ask it for her. She's asking, I'm interested in helping all my students feel comfortable. I want them to embrace themselves. Do you have any suggestions for how to model that for students as opposed to just telling them? Those will be to be comfortable in their own skin.
Oh. Yeah, because you know what? I also heard a child, I think they were about 6th grade, and it really broke my heart in some ways because the classroom was being videotaped for the end of the school kind of stuff, activities, and asked if they would like to see it at the end, and they go, oh, I don't want to see me, and I don't like hearing my voice, and I don't like listening to what I have to say. And I thought, oh my goodness, we've done something somewhere where we've made it so hard for this child to find their own personal value, that the mirror reflection they were getting was one where it may not be a positive, and so therefore they would just rather not observe it. So I said, oh, okay, so let's see. If there's all of those pieces that aren't positive pieces for you to hear, if you had to pick one, and we just say for the next 6 weeks we're going to focus on making that one an okay to listen to, would you rather do it as looking at yourself? Would you rather do it hearing your ideas? Or would you rather do just hearing your tone, your voice for singing or speaking? Because it was like we can't just give them that blanket. Know yourself. Feel comfortable with who you are. Because for so many kids, that's too broad. I knew this child was a sensing child. So instead of making it broad, I was breaking it down into a smaller unit of being okay. One of the best things I think teachers can do to make children feel comfortable with who they are is to frequently like 4 or 5 times a day, verify verbally a difference. So I might say, okay, we're going to be creating a story. And some people in our class are going to create the story because they're going to have an idea they just want to share, and they thought of this idea, and then they're going to figure out how to make that idea story happen. And some people in our class are going to start with, well, I could talk about when I was mowing the lawn, and then when I was mowing the lawn I saw this bug, and when I saw this bug I thought, how could that bug survive in this heat? And then I realized this bug has special protections about them that make them comfortable in the heat. And I could talk about how that bug lives in his family and takes care of the family in the heat, even with all this going on. So whether you start with the specifics and then get your new idea, or you start with a new idea and then figure out what specifics will my audience need to hear, you can both be great writers and come up with great stories. So I've modeled with my language to take an S approach or an N approach, but I have also verified for both of them that if you go this way you're okay, and if you go this way you're okay. We're going to be looking at the output, your final story. and see how it is. So I would do that maybe later on in Ian and I. Some of you are going to say, I'd really love to talk with a friend about this, and some of you are going to say, I'd really like to just be alone and think about this. Because sometimes I like working with my friends, and sometimes I like working on my own. And that's okay, because you don't have to do it the same way every time. People play and practice different ways. So feel comfortable trying it different ways. But both are okay. What's not okay is not working. So you got to figure out what's your best way of working, not working. And so I guess if I had to say what would I do to help make a classroom comfortable, it would be the constant affirmation of qualitatively different ways of getting the job done that are non-intrusive to the other person's style. Guys, I've had some great questions today. Thank you so much for that.
Yes, that was wonderful. Thanks for sharing that last bit there. I think that really resonated. And thank you all for coming. We've gone a little over our hour, but I think it was worth it. And sorry for our technical difficulty in the beginning. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for doing this.
Okay. And Type for Kids is, we've got 100 ideas up there, plus now we're getting into some parenting pieces with that. So it may be a fun place for just picking up snatches of information.
That's right. Go to yeah, I think what Elizabeth's saying is go to Facebook, to the Type for Kids page. You can follow us on Twitter. We have a Type for Kids YouTube channel, a typeforkids.org webpage, and there's lots of information there you can get for yourself and share with anyone who wants to learn about this. So thank you all, and we'll have this recording up on our website in a little bit, and we'll schedule another webinar probably in the fall.
All right. Thank you all.